tuned into Recovery TV, the voice of hope, with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Discussions and information on addiction and mental health issues. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome to another edition of Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Narcan, please get it. Keep it in your purse. Keep it in your car. You got to take it out at night. The weather will make it an issue out of it. But please get it. It saves lives. I want to talk to you today about two of my good friends, Mr. Charles Feldman and Mr. Jim McNulty. Been in the business a long time for mental health and substance use. So Jim, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here. To tell you a little bit about my background, it's very personal. I got into the business because I live with mental illness, and I started when I was in college back around 1970, and I used to self-treat my depression using alcohol and some drugs.
Yeah.
We didn't have the variety of drugs back then that we have now.
Thank God.
Yeah. No, actually, it is a blessing, I think. But for years, I struggled with depression and didn't know that that's what it was. And, it'd go away and I'd be okay. I got married, went into business, had my own business. Things were going pretty well. And then I was in a very bad car accident and had to have a lot of operations. And unfortunately, one of the things that happened was that they gave me a lot of painkillers to take. I fortunately was able to get into a program that helped me, a physical fitness program that helped me stop using the painkillers. But the depression was much, much worse. And it ended up, I lost my business, my wife and I split. I wasn't able to be a parent, to my two sons. And I still didn't know what the problem was. And one day I was just driving in a car listening to the Sherm Strickhauser show, of all things. And I heard a doctor being interviewed, a psychiatrist, about depression. And I said, oh my God, he's talking about me. So I got involved in a trial, an investigative trial for one of the newer style antidepressants. And that turned out to be something that was quite helpful. It wasn't all of the problem, because turned out I also had bipolar disorder, which was a little more mysterious and hidden. But it just really finally finding some method of treatment and getting some relief and getting some quality of life back was really great. And it was back around that time that Charlie and I actually met each other at a drop-in center called Oasis, which at that point was over near the State House. And it was people who had been involved in the community mental health system, many people who'd been at the state hospital, now called Eleanor Slater, but back then was the IMH. And I talked to the people and bonded with them, and I really found a sense of mission. And I started to work with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI Rhode Island. We founded a really great partnership where we had a consumer organization, mental health consumer organization, and a family organization that put the strengths of both organizations together. And we started to have quite an impact on the political scene. We were able to get changes made in the way the system worked here in Rhode Island, and I spent a lot of time advocating up at the State House in those days. And then one day somebody said, gee, I'd like you to go to a conference in Washington. So I ended up going to a conference in Washington. The next thing I know, I'm involved in the national mental health scene.
Wow.
And I ended up as the president of NAMI, National, served on the National Advisory Mental Health Council as a consumer member, as we were known back then. I was the only non-professional member of the council at that time, and they had to overcome real pushback from particularly the psychologists. Right. They didn't like the idea of a non-professional, but because I had some credentials, I was an economist, they decided to let me get away with it. But I spent time in Washington, and I worked on healthcare reform, and I'm glad I did. But I always wanted to come back and work in Rhode Island and take all the things that I developed and worked with and bring them here.
Home.
Yeah, and I ended up working starting in 2013 with Oasis as the executive director. And I was the executive director of Oasis from 2013 up until very, very recently. It's now part of the Providence Center, and I'm a consultant there. But I feel that the foundation of recovery is, to me, recovery is really simple. A safe, decent place to live, purpose in your life, some sense of purpose, something, and social network.
Right.
And that's what we provide at Oasis, and that's what Charlie and I worked for years to try and get the system to understand that it's not just about medicine, it's not just about doctors.
It's the whole thing.
It's,
Yeah. So Charlie, welcome.
Thank you for having me and us.
You're welcome. Tell me a little bit about Charlie Feldman.
Well, I was in college and my senior year, and all of a sudden I discovered this conspiracy that I had previously been unaware of. And I had been seeing a psychologist, but he was very eccentric. He said there was no such thing as mental illness. He said there was no such thing as therapy. He said I'm only responsible for myself. So I went into this believing there was no such thing as mental illness. But then this psychologist, when I got in some minor scrapes, put me in the hospital. And I started seeing a psychiatrist from the hospital. And I told him there's no such thing as mental illness. And he raised his voice back at me and said, there is such a thing. I've seen it, which didn't help me at all, because I was already in what I later realized was a psychosis. And I didn't trust him at all after that. And he said if I didn't keep seeing him, he'd put me in the hospital. So I kept seeing him, but I didn't really tell him anything that was really going on because I didn't trust him. That went on for 6.5 years. Finally, I was in the hospital for the last time in 1981, and I got on the medication that actually worked, although I didn't realize it was working. So finally, I got away from that psychiatrist, moved it to Providence, out of my parents' house, because he also said if I didn't live with my parents, he'd put me in the hospital, and that didn't work out too well. So the psychiatrist at the Providence Center, who I was seeing at the time, when I didn't realize the medication was working, he said, how have things been for the past couple of years? And I said, not too good. He said, why don't you try it? He didn't say you have a mental illness, you have to take this. He actually asked me how things were going and asked me if I would try it, which is, I later learned is called validation. It's important to validate someone instead of just dogmatically imposing your opinion on them. And also curiosity is important. Ask, how are things going? instead of just assuming you know the answer to everything. And then I went from there. For the first few years, I didn't have that much to do. I was lying in bed a lot, going for walks, and then eventually there was a day program. I was going there. Then, as Jim said, the Oasis started. I was working in a mailroom.
Charlie, we got to take a break because I'm going to get in trouble if I don't do that.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll finish your story. You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We'll be right back after these messages.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Mr. Charlie Feldman and Mr. Jim McNulty are my guests today. Both gentlemen working with mental illness, but I want to thank both of you for coming on. It's really something to see you two gentlemen come right out like Rocky, you know, like they want to do the right thing for the right thing. So Charlie, before I interrupt you, I want you to finish your story.
Well, I was working in a mailroom, and one of the temporary workers, said he was going to a mental health meeting. And I was curious, so I went to it. It turned out to be the predecessor of Oasis. And so I became a member of Oasis, and then I started working for NAMI a few years later. And then Oasis asked me to forward a job opening, and I thought, I could do that. So for whatever reason, I applied for it and got the position, and since then I've been working at Oasis, but NAMI didn't let me go. They put me on their board of directors. And so then Oasis became a program of the Providence Center, and so now we're there, which has its advantages because there are a lot of people at the Providence Center who can benefit from Oasis. But you don't have to be a Providence Center client to go there.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question, Jim. You've been around a long time. We were just talking about how long you sit on the Governor's Behavioral Health Council. Have you seen things change from when you first were diagnosed to like right now? Is it better? Is it staying the same? I mean, I'm assuming that the medication that they give patients are better now than they were back then. But what about the overall aspect of people that have to work and live with mental illness?
It's a mixed bag.
Okay.
I will say that I think people get diagnosed more quickly, and I think the medical part tends to go fairly well, although there's a shortage of prescribers, as you know. What we don't have is programs that help people sort of get on with their lives. And as you know, both in mental health and substance use, acute episodes interrupt our lives, and it can be hard getting back on your feet. And for some people, there just aren't the right supports.
Right.
The other problem that we're running into now is we have an aging population, and older people with both mental health and substance use needs are more complicated, and we're not ready for that. And I'm very worried about what's going to happen there. We've talked with nursing homes and assisted living organizations, and they're just not really.
Yeah, there's very few nursing homes that will take someone who has issues with substance use and mental health together. They'll take them if they have mental health, but they're not too keen on taking them with substance use. There's only a few. But that being said, and I think you guys would probably agree with me, is that the pendulum on the substance use end is going way too far to the left. If someone of our age goes in for surgery, shoulder surgery, leg surgery, you're not given the correct medication to get better. So a lot of the people that live in senior housings and live in, other locations are going to the street to get their pain medication. And that's not good because ultimately, sometimes, most of the time, often, they get bad stuff.
Right.
and they die of an overdose. So are you seeing that at all in your job at the Providence Center, either one of you?
Well, an Oasis member just this morning was talking about one of her neighbors who's in a lot of pain and keeps saying she wishes she was dead because she's in so much pain and she can't get any pain medication.
And there are alternatives. You know, people can take Suboxone, people can take methadone if they have acute pain that lasts. I mentioned the car accident I was in, and I was on very, very heavy doses of opiates at the time. But at the end of it, there was a program that I was able to get into that was physical therapy that allowed me to get
Away from it.
away from it because I was strong, you know, I was able to build up. For older people, that's not as easy.
Right.
We do have a couple of members who have long-term pain and they're taking methadone treatment and they're doing pretty well. And to me, it's just, it's a mystery. I think there's kind of a stigma against the medical use of a medication like methadone. I mean, it is useful. You know, yes, it's dangerous, but used properly, it can give people a new lease on life and allow them to operate, you know, pretty pain-free.
Yeah. Are there a lot of folks that enter into your program, Charlie?
Well, like I said, now that we're at the Providence Center, people who are otherwise at the Providence Center are finding out about us, and even some people who aren't at the Providence Center are finding. One person came this morning from a sober house, and I guess someone told him that we were there, and so it fulfilled his requirement of being in a support group. So it's great that we're getting these new members.
Or maybe with the help of this program, too, you may be getting more members. I have to go to break, and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about when we come back. You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, Sean Tassoni. We'll be right back after these messages.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, Sean Tassoni. Charlie Feldman's in the house, along with Jim McNulty. Two great guys. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. I want to talk a little bit about Oasis as a whole and the merger and how everybody came together, and now you're moving the ball down the field. Tell me about it.
Well, one of the things that I had a discussion with one of my colleagues at Anchor Recovery, and he was telling me that many of the people in his sober houses were struggling with mental illness as well as substance use. I don't think we appreciate that many people treat their illnesses by using drugs and alcohol.
Right.
As I said to you, I used alcohol very extensively to treat my bipolar disorder. They didn't have as many drugs when I was younger. But that's, you know, you asked me about advances. I don't think we really understand how many people
are
really
in that situation.
in that situation, and we don't know how to treat them.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming on today. We got the number right up on the screen, so 432-7621. So thank you both for joining us today. My guest next week will be Zach Kenyon of Safe Stations. Remember, if you see something, say something. Have a great week. See you next week.